Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Deondra Rose. I'm the Director of Research for Polis, the Center for Politics here at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University, and I'm excited to welcome you to this panel on global perspectives on equitable voting and civic engagement. We are very lucky to have with us an amazing roster of panelists who can give us a variety of perspectives on not just what this particular political moment means, but really the broader scope of thinking about democracy and how to engage citizens in that work. So I'm very excited to invite our panelists to reveal their video, and they can feel free to unmute whenever they would like to join in, but to offer some short introductions, and then I'll turn it over to each panelist to share a little more extensively about what they do. We're really excited to have with us Professor Abdullah Antepli, who is a professor of the practice here at the Sanford School of Public Policy and an associate professor of interfaith relations at Duke University's Divinity School. Welcome, Abdullah.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Dr. Rose, and my new home, Sanford. Delighted to be part of this wonderful panel.
Well, we're so excited to have you here and to learn from you today, Abdullah. I'm also excited to introduce to you Mathilde Bouyé, who is joining us from many time zones away. So Mathilde, thank you so much. I know it's late where you are for staying up extra late and being with us. Mathilde is the head of the Climate-SDG team within the World Resources Institute's Global Health Climate Program, and will share with us some fascinating insights on citizens' assemblies. So we're really excited to have you here today.
Good evening, everyone. My pleasure.
Thank you. And then finally, we have Philile Shongwe. And Philile, please correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but we are so lucky to have you as a valuable student voice on this panel. And Philile is an MIDP candidate at Duke University Sanford School of Public Policy, and also a Rotary Peace Fellow, a Duke-UNC Rotary Peace Fellow. And so we're just excited to learn about your perspective, Philile, and you're joining us now also from many time zones away. And so you're from Eswatini? That's exactly right. Former Swaziland.
Yes.
And you are there right now. So again, like it's pretty late your time too. So thank you very much for being with us at this late time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rose. It's such an honor to be here and to join in this discussion. Yeah, really excited.
Well, to start off, I would like to ask each of the panelists to just share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, the kind of work that you do, and maybe a minute or two. So I'll start with you, Abdullah.
Sure. I am known on campus as the Blue Devil Imam. I come from a religious background. I'm a clergy myself. Also, I am known as the Turkish Delight Imam. These are two wonderful titles I carry. I grew up in Turkey, which was a militarist dictatorship in 1980s when I was growing up. And I lived in different parts of the Middle East, mostly in Israel, Palestine, and spent 8 years in Southeast Asia, 5 years in Myanmar, and then 3 years in Malaysia, working in various relief and humanitarian projects, mostly working in the fight against the sex slavery, sex industry through education in that part of the world, and then ended up making North Carolina as my home, which is relevant to our conversations. And the primary attraction to America was, after growing up in Turkey, living in many parts of the developing world, there's so much to be loved and admired about American society, but our civic space, our civic culture, our ability to navigate the will of the people, not only elections every 4 years, but what happens between those 4 years. I think so much to be learned and so much to be protected as they are facing enormous amount of challenges, and so much to be inspired by many parts of the world. Things that we do here is beyond people's imagination. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. I'm so excited to hear more on all of those topics in the course of our conversation. Mathilde, may I turn to you?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm currently leading the work at the World Resources Institute on public participation in climate action. We have also a very strong focus on social equity. My background is in political science, has started to study in France and then at the College of Europe in Bruges. So I also worked in EU institutions, in the European Commission. So I was very engaged in thinking how you could build a transnational institution and public. I also worked 8 years for the French government, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Environment, dealing with civil society engagement. And so I have been working for DABRI now for about 5 years with another hat, with more in the position of experts, exploring how we can harness the democratic innovations to accelerate the ecological transition.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. That's fantastic. And I also look forward to hearing more from your experience in the course of our discussion today. And finally, Philile, love to hear about what you've been up to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, it was so great to be with these panelists. So as Dr. Rose said, my name is Philile, and I'm from the Kingdom of Eswatini. Not a trivial point to highlight here, given what we will be discussing today. And I am a Master of International Development Policy Fellow at the Duke Sanford School of Public Policy, and also a Rotary Peace Fellow. And really my research interests and the things that I love doing is exploring how education and social entrepreneurship can foster peace. And so just to give you some background, I have worked as a development researcher in my early career. That means I have worked with lots of different partners, usually governments and NGOs, to understand the impacts of the programs they're implementing on the ground. Just to highlight a few, I spent the year of 2019 working very closely with the Ministry of Gender in Malawi to design and also measure and evaluate their social protection system. And that was a really important year because it was also a very tumultuous election year for that country, which, if some of you are aware, led to a historic rerun and the opposition finally winning that election. So it was an interesting space to work. And then I also spent quite a lot of time working in Francophone West Africa with really a great NGO based out of Senegal, working with rural communities, fostering ideas around civic participation, working with the resources that they have to really enact change. And those have really colored my efforts even here back at home, where we're really working with different civil society organizations that are not
Looks like we might have a little bit of an interruption for Philile's internet. Oh, so you broke up just a little bit there, Philile. Would you mind repeating just the last part?
Yeah, sure. I'll just wrap up. So I was saying that working with different different organizations who are helping young girls navigate challenges such as unintended pregnancies. So we're talking adolescent girls, and also informing them about resources related to sexual violence. So yeah, that's what I have been up to. Thank you so much again.
Quite a bit. Thank you so much, Philile. So, I'd love to maybe start off with Abdullah, if I may. Abdullah, you have over the years lived in multiple regions, so you are truly a global citizen. And I'm wondering, how has that shaped your perspective on, democracy, on civic engagement? Yeah, I'll start with that.
Thank you. I am truly a global citizen, and I'm proud of it. I lived in 4 different countries for a long period of time, traveled to 76 countries. I studied about 10 languages and learned about 6 of them, which makes me unique American in that sense. Ultimately, what this global exposure and experience made me to believe that humanity doesn't work in silos. No one has the entire pieces of the puzzle. Cosmopolitanism is a future of humanity, that we all carry different pieces of the puzzle as we improve human civilization, human society, human conditions. As we try to reveal the best of humanity, we all need each other. So globalism, and within that cosmopolitanism, everybody bringing the best of themselves and trying to come up with a global community in a competition, but not in contradiction and confrontation. That made me this truly a really religious believer and evangelizer of this global vision. It made me incredibly turned off and hostile towards any kind of isolationism, that nations can build walls around themselves, civilizations can just put seen and unseen barriers between East and West and talk about global clashes of civilization. I despise and detest anything like that. And I think there's a way in which we can still hold on to those particularisms of our civilizations produced over the years as we try to build overarching moral connections, overarching win-win business opportunities, overarching win-win cross-pollination as we need one another. It is, to me, a moral calling that we at some point learn some of the modern challenges that we are facing is forcing us. It's an imperative on us. No one will be able to solve the rising popularism or racism. No nation alone will be able to solve the environmental crisis, which is promisingly existential. It's facing us. So we have both pragmatic reasons, survival reasons, and ethical, moral reasons to act like a global family and see each and every one of us as member of this family. So I passionately work in that area to make sure you invest in your well-being. At the same time, you invest in the well-being of a global community, because we are all one ship. Just because my little room in that ship is fine, doesn't mean this ship will sail smoothly. We have to invest our resources, energy, and time, including the expansion of democratic and civic engagement values, as much as we can, in respect with local traditions and cultures. This doesn't mean we're going to create a homogeneous, one type, one shape, monolithic. That's not possible. We've never been homogeneous. Human beings are created differently. But I think if we can bring those differences as different pieces of the puzzle to create one unison picture, that's exactly what we need to do. So I am a proud cosmopolitanist, if that's a correct English word. That's what, because there is so much to be gained. There is so much to be learned. And there is so much sad and lost if you don't know how to bring the globe into your home and engage. Like, one of my greatest disappointment with America, about 60% of my fellow American citizens, they have never owned a passport, according to 2015 numbers. You know, it's unbelievable. That means they've never been even to Canada and Mexico. We are a large country. There's so much to see here. But that's something missing. I wish more Americans would learn more cultures. They would do business with many more different parts of the world and countries. It'll only make us better, richer. I believe in this. I lived this.
Abdullah, may I ask a quick follow-up to that? So thinking about, you know, this idea of global citizenship, of really questioning boundaries, I think it's really, it's fascinating, because there's also this natural tension between boundaries and, you know, what political, you know, all of the efforts to get votes are steered toward, you know, producing some sort of authority to govern in a particular territory. It's, you know, related to this division of labor of governing. So, you know, how do you reconcile that? Can you think of regions that do a good job of actually pushing against that inclination?
I don't think, since some of these challenges you mentioned are consequences and outcomes of recent global issues, I don't think no nation has ever really got a full handle of it yet. But I see in so many ways, European Union or members of the European Union, for example, in welcoming strangers and refugees, integrating and incorporating them into their economic force, their civic culture, and establish a respectful civic space where people can exist as who they are, but they can commit to doing something in that particular territory. There is tremendous amount of goodness in that particular sense. It is so interesting if you look at the numbers of people that Scandinavian countries, Germany has accepted in recent years. Some of that waves of immigration through refugees or other ways, it is creating so much problems for American society and culture. But look at these countries who are receiving way many more people than we receive, way many more diverse people than we receive, and they make it work. I think there's something praiseworthy. It's not entirely full glass. There is an emptier side of the glass. There's a rising far right there. But I have seen the recent numbers, especially in Germany, after accepting 1.5 million refugees, most of them are Syrians, their success in integration, but measure of success is their buy-in to German democratic values. Their buy-in and sense of belonging to German civic culture is an incredible bright spot in the midst of so many confusions.
Thank you so much for that, Abdullah. So I want to, stay on this theme of bright spots here. And Mathilde, if I may turn to you, there is an article you recently wrote on citizens' assemblies. And I have to say, before I read your piece, I had never heard of this. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what on earth are citizens' assemblies and how are they used? And I should also ask, where are they used?
Sure. So citizen assemblies are quite recent. So this is probably why you haven't heard about them before. So they are the most recent forms of deliberative processes that have developed in a context of growing distrust in representative democracies and political systems. They are also the most radical and ambitious deliberative processes. So this is why they are so interesting. So concretely, citizen assemblies gather a sample of the population that is randomly selected to learn and to deliberate on a specific topic or questions, with the view to provide decision-making, political decision-making and public opinion with informed recommendations. So it's the legitimacy of citizen assembly rests on a different form of representation than that of elected assemblies, one that fully reflects the diversity of the society. So how it works concretely, so organizers gather a pool of volunteers that they call or the mail, and then they randomly select the members of the assembly based on different criteria: the gender, location, ethnicity, depending on the matter as well. So the assemblies really mirrors the diversity of the population. To give an example, in the Climate Assembly UK, that had just released its report 10 days ago, 1/4 of the members didn't have any degree, and it's roughly the same proportion that the broader society. And so there is very strong emphasis in those assemblies on the learning phase, the independence of the deliberation, and an evidence-based approach to policy making. So usually there is a very strong governance framework with an advisory panel that makes sure that the members of the assemblies are provided with accurate, balanced and quality information so they can make their own mind. They usually last for at least 4 days, so they have really the chance to get under the skin of the problem, developing their own understanding and challenging assumptions. I can go further later, but that's just a snapshot.
That's fantastic. And may I ask just maybe one, again, tag on a question I'm curious about. It sounds like this is especially democratic in that it really targets groups that might otherwise go underrepresented in this sort of direct or high level democratic engagement, you know, especially by targeting, I mean, I'm blown away by the proportion of participants who didn't have a degree, for example. But I'm wondering, are there any things built into this process, like to kind of correct for, say, differences in socioeconomic status, like a stipend or something like that? Because, you know, if it goes for multiple days, my guess is it might, that taking that kind of time away from, say, paid work might be different for other people.
Yeah, there is a reward. Yeah, they receive a financial compensation to stay those long weekends working. And there is also some childcare provided. So depending on the countries, they definitely receive some compensation. It was not the case during the Irish Assembly, Citizen Assembly, organized between 2016 and 18. And that was a key lesson from this process, that to give a chance to everyone to participate, it was very important to provide some financial compensation.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. So Philile, I want to turn to you. And, you know, in your situation, you come from a kingdom. And as you've mentioned, that's a very different context for engaging in democracy or, you know, in civic engagement. Can you tell us a little bit about what civic engagement looks like, you know, from your perspective? And I'm really especially curious about engagement among young people.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I think first it's just to understand that a lot of the engagement that is happening is people figuring it out. And that's, I think, the most important question. It's really the idea that where there isn't very clear paths that you can take, how do you create from scratch? And what I've seen in recent years is really promising. So I'll highlight one example. As some of you may actually be aware, Southern Africa has one of the most alarming rates of gender-based violence. And it's really, and you know, Eswatini is not an exception at all. And so, you know, with a problem like this, a lot of what you can do is think, okay, what can you do? You look at the elected officials, probably not top of mind. And what I've liked is just small groups, small, usually youth-led groups, mobilizing from the very little that they have with no legal knowledge, really questioning what the law can do, what protections are there. So what we saw was a lot of youth organizations that work with young men, a lot of youth organizations that were really focused on other aspects, coming together and over time drafting what is now, it was actually enacted, I think 2 years ago, the Sexual Offenses and Domestic Violence Act, which opens up a whole new toolkit. And really, this was happening, simmering under the radar, but because more and more people were kind of making the rules as they were going. Can you still hear me? Sorry,
oh yes,
I think I can. Okay.
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Because people were kind of doing things the way that they felt they needed to do them and not following strict procedures. What you ended up seeing was that they were reaching people that would not necessarily usually be involved in this kind of thing. They were going to survivors in rural areas. And that really has shaped what has happened after this act has been enacted. What you have now is the real work of educating people about it, right? Like, so that means you have comics with images so that anyone, even if you can't read or write, you understand what it is that you are now entitled to go and fight for, that you are protected by law. And it really helps people and own that kind of change. So I think, yes, there are clear constraints. It's so difficult to work where you don't feel that you can participate, or that like means something, but it also means that you can set the agenda and you can navigate it in just interesting ways. And you don't have to be an expert. The worst thing is really not doing anything in that situation where, you know. So yeah, that's how I think people are doing that right now.
Thank you so much for that. And if it's okay, I want to pick up on one of your points, Philile, and I guess I'll direct this next question to you first, if I may, and then open it up to our panelists if they have things to add on it. But I'm really struck by this question of like how we socialize or how we help sort of marshal new citizens or young citizens into the political landscape or the civic landscape. You know, and you mentioned the value of tools that help with learning. So comics, you know, I think that's innovative. You know, I'm just curious about your thoughts related to opportunities to or methods of helping to educate young citizens. I mean, sort of like civic education stuff. Can you think of any best practices, or, you know, I'd love to hear from your perspective if, you know, what's your impression of how well, you know, your country or other countries do this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Something like comics is just, it seems so small, but it's so powerful. If you can think about how it not only like resonates with you know, older people, younger people, it's just a different way to tackle these very important topics. But what I think, I'd say two things I think have worked best from what I've observed. Really, it's when a society allows people to just take a step, like a wild, like make a choice to say, I think this is a problem, and I'm just either gonna do something about it, I'm gonna talk about it, so that people understand that we as a society are inherently have these attitudes. We want things to be better, but it's the difference between us just sort of living it or living with it or being apathetic and saying something. And that's really the beginning. And I think that is so empowering. And then I want to highlight sort of an interesting, let's say, method or technique that I saw happening in West Africa. And I mentioned before some of the rural communities, really creating spaces so that people understand what can happen in a collective. I really am so encouraged when it's not about having the resources, or like it's about thinking and ideating around challenges and solutions together, and then having and harnessing the power that you have as a collective to make those things come about. And it's really what you know, the civic participation and democracy is. It's sort of encouraging that kind of activity and action at the very most local of ways, and that really opens up people's minds to what they can achieve, what a vote means, for instance, what just an idea and a thought, and that really is powerful. So I think those are some things that could be leveraged.
That is powerful. Thank you for that. I want to open it up, Abdullah and then Mathilde. And I should also say, like, you know, in thinking about this, I mentioned young voters or newer voters, for example, but I'm thinking, you know, this kind of political and civic socialization is a lifelong process. And I think, you know, with citizens assemblies, for example, people really are taking opportunities to really learn and delve into issues at different points, you know, in their trajectory or development. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Mathilde, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I don't think that my country, France, provides a great example of civic education at school. It's usually only 1 hour within history class. But I've come across great practices experience only at the school level, so it's not mainstreamed. When they try to put together juries of students to tackle a very specific issue and learn then how to listen to each other, that we can deliberate without necessarily aiming at building a consensus or to come up with a binary approach to the issues, but simply with the objectives to map out the preferences of all the participants and try to understand why are the reasons why some dislike the proposals, other will promote it. So it's a lesson of tolerance, I would say, respect, which is the very core of what we need to build a community, and which is terribly lacking on social media and in TV shows. So I think this requires time, and people don't have time today to listen to each other and are in the bubble and don't open their mind. So I think forcing students to take times, several hours to really dig into an issue and listen to each other, it's a great practice.
I just want to broadly add a few problems I see inspired by your comments. I think in general, if you want to kill the joy on anything, if you want to just destroy the creativity on anything, just call it as a chore or force people to do it. There is so much of untapped energy, especially among younger generation, through civic education, civic participation. You can sort of activate so much untapped talent, energy, joy, if you can message it in a compelling and engaging way that this is an opportunity. This is not a chore. This is not a duty. This is not something that you do because you have to pass this class or exam. I think we are not doing well. We are doing ourselves a disservice by making this very boring and unattractive in our messaging to our youth. I think there's so much to be there. I really hope Philile and Mathilde's work, like many other young generations, substantial contribution to civic education, civic engagement in different parts of the world should be highlighted. There should be a little bit more attractive messaging around this issue. The apathy, the boredom comes with the way it's been presented. In defense of the young generation, I don't think the older generation have made it attractive and appealing enough to sort of get rid of that boredom and apathy and antipathy. And this is our responsibility to do it.
Thank you so much for that, Abdullah. And, I'm really curious, thinking about perceptions, and I'll switch gears a little bit, but I'm really curious thinking about, different political sort of moments and instances of contentious politics that could have some bearing on how a particular country is viewed in the global community. And that is by their friends or their foes. I'd love to hear your thoughts, as a global citizen, about what are the stakes in terms of getting citizen or civic engagement right, or doing democracy properly when it comes to building or sustaining a reputation in the global community?
Thank you. It's a great question. And as someone who follows the world media through multiple languages, multiple medias, I obsessively, especially around this election season, check what Turkish media, Arabic media, Persian media, Indonesian media says about us as Americans. And successful countries, successful companies, they sort of built their success on not on the quality of the product that they built, but also their brand, their reputation, their credit score. These are perceptions, but it has very real life implications of your standing in that community. So people's perception deeply, deeply matters. And especially, as I didn't coin the term, but I think it's so accurate, presidential elections or national elections, always like a CT scan. It's almost like it puts the entire nation into an MRI machine, and it shows what has been grown in them, what's growing in them, figuratively speaking. And For a lot of our global friends and foes, there is so much to be reflecting as they follow our yet another presidential election. I think there are many parts still, despite all the challenges and tensions. There is so much to be proud of. There is a fuller side of the glass. It's not all done. But I want to just quickly reflect on the emptier side of the glass. When our friends and foes from different global cities looking at America, and when they see increased level of polarization, increased level of nativism, increased level of isolationism, increased level of unwelcome that they hear in real or in perception. So it deeply puzzles our friends. It deeply puzzles our friends in the democratic world, in the developing world, who would like to see America thriving, and with us they are thriving as well. But I want to focus more on the foes and enemies, because my scholarly work, last 20 years, I spent long hours decoding, translating the preachings of terrorists, mostly from the Islamic background. And I'm trying to understand, what are they selling? What exactly they are trying to do? And if you really listen to these evil people, terrorists, often doing things in the name of my beautiful religion, Islam, they know they cannot defeat us militaristically. They know they cannot defeat us economically. They don't have such power. So they know they can defeat us in one way, as Ayman al-Zawahiri, number 2 of Al-Qaeda, put it so plainly. He says, for everything that we do, we have to make sure they hate each other. We have to make sure whatever holding together their civilizational strength is no longer intact. Their social fabric, we need to tear that apart. And for a lot of these enemies, there is unfortunately so much victory lapse as they see American voices spewing intolerance, spewing or attempting, intentionally or unintentionally, destroying our civic and democratic engagements. So for them, they only have one measure of success. Can Americans increasingly become intolerant to one another? Can they tolerate each other much less? That's their only measure of success. And our perception, as it's been exaggerated in some ways, some of the increasing polarization, division, hostility, intolerance in our political system, in our civic system, is unfortunately giving too much material for enemies to be joyful, our friends to be worried and concerned. You know, one implication, civilizations don't realize, if people change their mind about America as a result of these perceptions, if they think we are not the superpower that we used to be anymore, if they send less of their brains to our schools as international students, if they rely on our universities and research and our patents, our trades, if they sort of change their mind, if the global furniture around who is producing the best of the best and vis-a-vis America, you will never know the consequences of this in the long term. They will buy less, they will engage less, they will cross-pollinate less. There will be devastating economic, social, political, civilizational, and intellectual consequences for America if this perception persists that somehow we are not revealing the best of ourselves. Somehow these MRI and X-ray results are increasingly showing some cancers of division and polarization in American society.
Thank you so much for that, Abdullah. And I want to actually stay with this, the image of sort of physical health is valuable here as we think about democratic health. And I guess I want to stay on the physical health side for a bit and ask the panelists if they have any insights about COVID-19 and what that has meant for civic engagement from your various vantage points, and thinking about, you know, the places where you work. So like Mathilde, I'm really curious about, you know, has COVID-19 disrupted the work of citizens' assemblies, or has it accelerated that work?
It has definitely disrupted their work, but not necessarily for the worst. So the citizen assemblies that were working by the time of the outburst moved online. So it was the case in the UK and France. So they have to add sessions, online sessions. And that this context has also pushed people to think outside the box. Because it's extremely challenging to pull together a group of people that have very different lives to think of a specific issue. And when they can't meet physically, it's even more challenging. So it has required a lot of thoughts. And it's very interesting to see that some citizens' assemblies are now only organized online because of the context. This is the case in the Washington state in the US. This is also the case in Scotland. Today I was interviewing Taïn Jaffrey, who is among the core team organizing the Citizens' Assembly in Scotland in the run-up of COP26 on climate. And she was explaining to me that it was extremely hard to design the learning process and the deliberation methods to make sure that everyone will have a chance to engage. But so far it has worked and worked very well. So that's a very good signal. We of course hope that people are going to be able to meet again soon, but it shows the fact that the COVID-19 hasn't stopped that trend. Send a very strong signal on the huge appetite for other forms of democracy. And to come back to your question, the one you asked to Abdullah, I think we need to take a step back. I mean, we are experiencing very contrasting trends, so sorry for my English. So at the global level, there is definitely a regression in the health of democracy. We know that the surveys performed by the Pew Research Center on the attitude toward democracy show that people are strongly attached to democracy. There is a very strong support for democracy, but at the same time, a deep dissatisfaction with representative democracy as it is. And the democracy index of The Economist in, I think, last year showed that democracy at the national level was in its worst state since 2006, since the creation of the index. But at the same time, and this is the positive side of it, there is a growing number of alternative democratic practices. I've mentioned citizen assemblies, but there is also a lot of citizen juries, a lot of participatory budgeting that engage resident citizens in very tricky choices about how you spend money for the public. And it worked very well. So I think we should stay positive. There is a strong public demand for reinvigorating our democratic systems and a lot of innovations to make that happen. So I'd like to present the other side of the coin as well.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. I love that. And Philile, I want to hear, I mean, I'm really thinking about this idea of momentum. And I have to say, I was in another conversation recently about young activists and this question of whether young people are just tired because of the pandemic and just so much going on. So I would love to hear your perspective on that. You know, are you sensing exhaustion and fatigue or momentum and energy?
Yeah, I think this is a good moment to jump in. I'll sort of start with the conversation Abdullah had started and Mathilde had continued. First, just around like, you know, what is the significance of an election and kind of what it says about the health of democracy. And I want to kind of highlight from more younger democracies that I have had the honor of experiencing on the African continent. So again, talking about the 2019 election year in Malawi, I think the significance of just the process of people going to vote was really elevated in an interesting way. So following the election and the announcement of the results, it you know, obviously people were I would say surprised by the results, and then there was overwhelming evidence that really the votes had not been respected. There was overwhelming evidence of tampering, people simply just removing certain votes, and what followed I thought was tremendous. And just to highlight the magnitude of the sacrifice that people made in going out and protesting, often numerous days, a week, for months. This happened from, you know, when the election happened in April up until March. That kind of persistence in people even as the pandemic was coming to light as a threat, people saying, no, we believe that this should be a process that reflects what we want. And I think, you know, that at least for other young democracies watching in the region, signals that this should be, this is how it should be done. And it also signals to young people who may be tired, so tired, that it does result in a change. And that's what people want to see. And they start to believe in these institutions and in these actions. So for those who don't know, that led to a rerun, right? This is kind of crazy. The election was done again. And this was despite the fact that a coronavirus had become a reality. The numbers of people that came out and showed out to say, we have been given an opportunity to make a difference in this country and voted was amazing. So I think the celebration of what a vote means and people understanding that their votes cannot be bought, and for the courts for doing the unexpected is we live for those bright spots, as you said earlier.
If I may,
Step in.
Yeah, I just quickly would like to echo that optimism and the kind of bright spot that you beautifully highlighting. Actually, Corona and this pandemic is giving us a very helpful window and prism. It's been already 7-8 months, so we are now able to go back and say, who's doing better? Who is more successful? And what do we learn through the prism of pandemic about these different nations? If you look at the countries who so successfully, relatively speaking, dealing Corona, there's a very strong correlation of those successful countries with female leadership in those countries, youth participation in those countries. And this is no coincidence. Very much to your point, the nations who are able to empower women, better half of their society, inspire the younger generation, give them a sense of belonging. They have a stake at this civic project. The more younger and female participation in any government, it's almost consistently their success rate in defeating COVID-19 is almost at the par in the same level. And opposite also true. Leadership who lacks in female, leadership, countries that lacks in or has very low participation in female leadership or youth leadership are doing, they are at the bottom of the barrel.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for those insights. So I also just want to mention to our audience, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, the Q&A box, and I will be excited to raise them for our panelists. But I also wanted to just stay on this idea of bright spots. And Mathilde or Philile or Abdullah, are there other things that give you hope at this moment? Or, and maybe if I could tag on an additional question, if you had, the power to determine where our global society puts its capital in terms of, or invest in working to promote citizenship broadly, where would you put your resources?
So maybe I can start with the first part of the question. I think it's very interesting to see current thinking on how to institutionalize the most promising democratic innovations practices. There is a great example in Eastern Belgium, for instance, the city that has institutionalized citizen assembly. The citizens are working together with the municipal council to provide other perspectives, and they have the ability to convene some working groups on specific issues with which the elected officials have troubles or are struggling to address. So it's very interesting to see current trends showing how we can complement what we know, the representative democracy that is actually relatively new, a few centuries, and that appeared in a context where the vast majority of the population was illiterate. So now that everyone has access to information, we need to be bolder and trust people a bit more. And I think it's a great trend to see that at the local level, there are a lot of practices that empower citizens and residents and give them an ability to intervene in policy making, not only once a year or once every 4 years, but on a daily basis or every month, and that's very exciting. I let others.
I'm sorry, what's that? The last one?
Others answer the second part of the question, so I don't monopolize the floor.
Well, feel free, but we can also come back to you, Mathilde. I just have to thank you for that insight. I love this idea of trusting citizens and you know, just reflecting on how long we've used certain structures, and I really like that. So thank you so much. And if you'd like to take a go at the second part of the question, or Philile and Abdullah, if you'd like to jump in on that one, please feel free.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly, and maybe we can move on to the questions that are coming up. But I really agree with this idea of us trusting people and going where the conversation isn't getting in these places. I think there's a heightened need to really squash inequality in all its, like, you know, underlying secretive ways that it takes over our society. And we talked earlier about civic education. I think we should, obviously, like Abdullah said, completely transform that. What does it actually mean? Maybe it's not happening in schools. How do we make sure that everybody feels involved and feels empowered with information, with knowledge, with trust of what can happen when they're fully involved? So I would really bet my money around anything that is going to open this up in just radical ways. Go everywhere and to everyone. And I wish I had like great ideas that would fit everywhere in the world, but I am happy to continue a discussion around that.
Just to
well, I love that. I was just going to say very quickly that I'm putting my money where Philile is putting her money. So Abdullah. I
will invest both Philile and Mathilde's campaign. I hope they will run for office. I will support thought leaders. They represent the best of humanity wherever they are, so they should run for office. I would divide my billions of dollars into two categories. One, to defend the democracy where it's at least minimally functional, both in Europe, North America. There are enormous amount of challenges to our democracy. And if anything, COVID shows who can go and safely vote and who can't go and safely vote. This is a direct threat. If democracy is one person, one vote, but one person, because of who she is or which zip code she lives, what skin color he has 10 obstacles to vote, and other person has no obstacle whatsoever. That's not representational democracy whatsoever. So we need to invest in protecting and further improving our democracy and its challenges, protect it from obstacles. But in the developing world, aspiring younger democracies, we should primarily invest in what happens between those 4 years before we invest in the sort of reductionist sense of democracy equal to elections. That's not true. I think, as we have seen in the example of certain countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, every country deserves democracy. Dictatorship of any kind is absolutely not acceptable, and they are morally repugnant. But there's a front-load investment that we need to do. And you can only do this through education, especially women in those societies, and bring a sustainable development where certain infrastructure in the civic space is there. So that, and there are so many good examples of this. I think what Gates Foundation is doing, what a lot of big charities are doing, different branches of the United Nations with all their flows, they are doing incredible amount of progress in many different parts of the world. That's how I would invest my money, in addition to the campaign for Philile and Mathilde.
Well, you're my investment advisor, Abdullah, and so I'm putting my money where you're putting yours, and with much enthusiasm. So before we wrap up, there's one question from Gunther in the chat, and I hope the panelists can take this question. I love the conversation. The silver lining of this pandemic is to expose the unfairness in access to the ballot, access in the US, which might produce reform. Is there a similar response emerging outside of the US? And I could even read, I might have mixed the words up. I want to make sure I get the question properly. So the silver lining of the pandemic is to expose the unfairness in access to the ballot across the United States, which might produce reform. So is there a similar response emerging outside of the US? So perhaps the use of this context to actually suppress engagement. Or maybe something for us to grapple with and mull over. So if I will say, if I know our panelists, I can reach them by email if there are any additional questions, and if they have any additional insights on that final question, which is really food for thought, I will make sure to make connections. But in the meantime, I am extremely grateful to our panelists for joining us from both near and far for this wonderful discussion of global perspectives. And I want to also thank our attendees for spending time with us today. It's been such a pleasure to be a part of these rich discussions, and I hope you will join us in 2 minutes for a book panel on Professor Bob Korstad and Professor Jemla Ludis's new book, Fragile Democracy, where they will focus particularly on North Carolina's really long and fascinating history when it comes to the fight for voting rights. And if you are planning to attend, please do see there's a separate registration. So we're actually not going to be in this particular Zoom room for this final event that's connected to the conference today, but you can find that link in the Polis website also in the registration that you used to get here today. So without further ado, thank you, Mathilde, Philile, Abdullah. It is just such an honor and pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure and honor is mine, especially to be a co-panelist to these inspiring future leaders.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rose, Mathilde, and Abdullah.
When are you coming back home, Philile? Are you coming back?
Well, in January, I hope.